realm of the microcosm with respect to quantum mechanics on the other. With these new laws governing the macrocosm, and Einstein's vision is not really consistent with Newton's vision. Einstein's vision is that, well, the entirety of space is a single mysterious mass-energy field. And gravity is really the curvature of space by massive objects. They warp the space around them. You can imagine a kind of foam rubber sheet with a bowling ball in the center, and the planets are like these little marbles that are rolling around the circumference because the space around them is warped. But that's a totally different vision from Newton's idea that gravity was this mysterious force acting upon objects from a distance that grew weaker the further objects were away from each other. We have shifted there from the mechanistic vision of a force acting over distances to the vision of a unified mass energy field. And so we're that much closer to the vision of a living cosmos once it has been woven together out of this seamless, as it were, field of energy. And then in quantum mechanics, there were a whole new set of laws down there which did not at all correspond to the laws of classical logic through which Newton had made sense out of the cosmos. So there was a new kind of vision of the cosmos by the turn of the 20th century where we got different laws acting at different levels. Not just one set of laws, as Newton had thought, consistent throughout, but different laws at different levels. Now that idea had been the old idea of the great chain of being. The top of the great chain of being, which was consistent through the Middle Ages, you had God, and below him you had armies of angels, and below that you had the spheres, and below that you had the earth with the four elements. On the earth, man was the noblest thing upon the earth. Below man were the animals. Below the animals were the plants. And below them were the metals. And so everything was graded into a hierarchy where there were different laws applying at each one of these levels. That vision was smashed and done away with by the Newtonian vision. But now, with respect to Einstein and quantum mechanics, the idea that there are different laws applying at a graded level at different hierarchies began to the great chain of being, in other words, began to resurface in the Western imagination. And that vision of the great chain of being is what is becoming kind of the new inspiration for the fusion of science and spirituality today. So a lot of the thinkers, most of the thinkers that I've interviewed in my book, have a wonderful new openness with respect to spirituality. Their work exists at the interface between the sciences and the humanities, largely in those two areas where the legacy comes from Carl Jung in the humanities and from Einstein's work in the sciences. And their work is dedicated to a kind of fusion of those two areas, along with some totally new, unprecedented ideas, such as chaos theory, the Gaia hypothesis, Rupert Sheldrake's morphogenetic fields. These ideas are mythologically inspired ideas. And so now we can say that, we can look at the history of Western civilization as the victory of science over mythology, the impact of science upon the biblical cosmology and its mythology, but now we're turning the other way, and we are seeing that science is drawing great inspiration from mythology. And a new generation of scientists is coming along who take mythology, religion, and spirituality seriously. And their vision includes within its purview certain phenomena which simply do not make sense and are an impossibility when looked at within the paradigm of a machine, a mechanical cosmos. This includes phenomena such as astrology, reincarnation, the existence of the soul, psychokinesis, telepathy, angels, the astral plane, and the like. The scientists that I have interviewed take these ideas seriously. They don't just push them out the door without further ado. And that really represents something new in science, a whole new attitude. And you won't find this being taught yet in the mainstream at the universities because the universities are still entrenched in the materialistic paradigm. They love Einstein, of course, but they dismiss Einstein's idea. For example, Einstein was once asked, an interviewer asked him, do you believe in God? And Einstein says, well, I believe in Spinoza's God, who reveals himself through the divine harmony of nature. But Spinoza's idea of God was that God is the world. God is not separate from the world. God is nature. And nature, insofar as we can think of it in terms of space and time, are two attributes of the infinity of attributes that we can assign to God. God is nature. And so as far as Einstein was concerned, nature itself was a revelation of the divine. But the academics generally take over the equations and the models, like Stephen Hawking, for example, and they leave the God out of it, they leave the religion out of it, and they leave all of this stuff out of it because they're not trained to think about these ideas. It makes them uncomfortable to do so. So now I want to shift in for the next 15 minutes or so to discussing some of the differences between the various spheres of mythology, religion, spirituality, and science. First, this will be for the second half, for the creation. First, I want to start with mythology, since this is the subject that I started from. I came to this whole subject from my studies of Joseph Campbell. I was an undergraduate English major out at ASU here, and I happened to have the good fortune to come across the works of Joseph Campbell. And the more I began to study Joseph Campbell's writings, the more I became fascinated with what Campbell termed the cosmological function of mythology. And this cosmological function is what is being handled for us today by the scientists. The cosmological function of mythology involves the creation of an image of the cosmos that is up to date. It is consistent with the knowledge of the time. And for many in our culture, this is what the sciences do, but religion has failed to keep up with the knowledge of the time. Campbell used to say that there is no conflict between science and religion. The conflict is rather between the science of 2000 BC and the science of 2000 AD. We are rather to think in terms of a conflict of cosmologies. Biblical cosmology having been literally interpreted based on the objective scientific knowledge of that time. Well, that knowledge has been refuted by these great scientific transformations and is therefore out of date. It is the job of a properly functioning mythological tradition to take into account the knowledge of the time, the cosmology of the time, and to transubstantiate it so that the spiritual energies will come pouring through. The job of a religion is to render the cosmos transparent to the transcendent, diaphanous to the inexhaustible energies of the cosmos. Now, Joseph Campbell used to define myth as mythology is the conduit through which the inexhaustible energies of the cosmos come pouring into human culture. Myth connects us to the cosmos. It weaves us in as microcosm into the macrocosm of the entire show. Now, the word itself, myth, actually is etymologically related to mouth. Now, why should that be? The word, the Greek word mythos, actually means a spoken word or a communication. Well, myths come from the mouth because they are stories that are told orally. Originally, they have been passed around. You know, we have the old image, do you remember Steven Spielberg's Amazing Stories with everyone, the Paleolithic cavemen sitting around the campfire at the beginning telling each other stories? That's the origin of myth, right there. It comes from the mouth, or the mouth rather is the vehicle of it, but it comes from the energies of the body, which in turn are superconductively transforming the energies of the universe. So myth is actually rooted in the body and in the cosmos. There are four functions to a traditional mythology. And these are the functions that Campbell normally described. And the first of them is the metaphysical function. A traditional mythology, the primary function of these traditional mythologies, is not just to tell a story. It's primarily that, but something is happening in the telling of the tale, which involves the touching of the transcendental energies, the mystery of being alive. The primary function of a myth is to awaken in the individual a sense of awe with respect to the mystery of being, a sense of gratitude and respect for the majesty of the cosmos. And if it doesn't do that, we don't have a properly functioning myth. Those dimensions have to be awakened. That is the metaphysical function. And normally this involves the recognition of an invisible plane that supports and informs the visible one. It isn't visible to the eye of the flesh. It is visible to the eye of the mind, the eye of the spirit. It is intuited from within. And so the mythologists are listening to the voice of the muses who are speaking to them of the transcendental energies of the cosmos that it will then be their job to carry into their culture in the guise of the clothing, the fashion of the culture of that time. And so the mythology of the Bible is simply a kind of clothing that's out of fashion. It's no longer speaking to us. That's the metaphysical function. To put it in the words of poet Percy Shelley, the one remains, the many change and pass. Heaven's light forever shines while earth's shadows fly.